As of this morning, the water level reading for the Harlan Reservoir is 4.1 meters and rising. The Harlan Dam has structural cracking that was discovered in 2014. It was never repaired. If the water reaches 10.4 meters, it overtops the dam. My house is 4 miles downstream. The reservoir was drained 8 years ago. The basin is empty. I can drive to the overlook right now and see nothing but cracked earth and dead sediment in every direction. There is no water, but the sensors say otherwise. And last week, for the first time, I looked down from the access road and saw that they were right. My name is Kyle Renna. I'm a hydrological monitoring technician for the Coulter County Water Authority in rural western Pennsylvania. My job is to maintain the sensor networks that track water levels, flow rates, and pressure across the county's reservoirs, dams, and treatment intake systems. I drive a county pickup to remote sites, swap out equipment, download data, and make sure the numbers on the central monitoring system are accurate. I've done it for 7 years. Every anomaly I've encountered has had a simple explanation: corroded wiring, a dead battery, a clogged intake, a beaver dam. Harlan Reservoir is the exception. The reservoir was built in 1958 by damming the upper Harlan Creek Valley. Small earthen dam, concrete spillway, 3 mechanical sluice gates. For decades, it served as a secondary water supply for the towns of Coulter and Braden Falls. In 2014, a routine inspection found structural cracking in the dam's concrete core. The state ordered a drawdown. By October 2016, the sluice gates were fully open and the reservoir was empty. The plan was to repair the dam and refill, but the county never secured the funding. The project was shelved. The basin sat open, drying in the sun, and the county quietly reclassified Harlan as decommissioned pending remediation. That was 8 years ago. The dam was never repaired, but the monitoring system was never fully disconnected, because the telemetry line also carries data from 2 stream gauges downstream. So the Harlan sensors kept reporting, and for 6 years they reported exactly what you'd expect: 0. Then, in early 2023, the readings changed. I didn't notice immediately. The Harlan data feeds into a dashboard I only check during monthly reviews. When I pulled up the January 2023 report, the graph showed a gentle curve where the flat line used to be. Low numbers, 0.4 meters, 0.6, 0.8, rising and falling in a smooth, rhythmic pattern. I assumed electrical noise. I flagged the sensor for replacement and moved on. In March 2023, I drove out to Harlan to swap the transducer. The access road climbs through second-growth hardwoods and crests a ridge before dropping down to the dam. When you reach the top, you can see the entire basin, a wide, shallow bowl about a quarter mile across, ringed by steep wooded hills. It was empty, dry, cracked sediment baked to a pale gray. The old lakebed looked like a desert floor. Rising from the center, about 200 yards from the dam, stood the intake tower, a square concrete column, maybe 40 feet tall, stained with horizontal mineral lines that marked the old water levels like rings in a tree trunk. It had spent 50 years submerged to within 6 feet of its top. Now it stood fully exposed, its base surrounded by dried mud and scrub grass. I walked out along the dam's maintenance catwalk to the Stilling well housing and replaced the transducer. 20 minutes. I sealed the housing, powered up the data logger, and watched the LCD 0.0, 0.0, 0.0. I nodded, fixed, then the display ticked. 0.1, 0.3, 0.8, 1.4, 2.1, 2.3. It climbed in about 90 seconds and stabilized. I opened the housing and looked into the Stilling well, a vertical PVC pipe, 8 inches in diameter, extending down through the dam structure. The pipe was bone dry. I could see the transducer sitting on bare concrete. There was nothing touching it. but the LCD said 2.3 meters. I tested the transducer with a bucket of water from my truck. It read the bucket depth perfectly. I reinstalled it in the empty stilling well, 2.3 meters. I drove back to the office and told myself it was an electromagnetic issue, something in the dam's rebar creating a field the sensor interpreted as pressure. I wrote it up and filed the report. 2 weeks later, I pulled up the Harlan data out of curiosity. The readings had continued. I exported the data and opened it in a spreadsheet. The fluctuation was rhythmic, a smooth sine wave with a period of approximately 12 hours and 25 minutes. I stared at the number. That's a lunar tidal cycle. The phantom water level in a dry, landlocked reservoir in the Appalachian foothills 400 miles from the nearest ocean was rising and falling with the tides. I brought it to Maren Colley. Maren was our senior field technician. She'd been with the Water Authority 26 years, longer than anyone except the director. She was practical in a way that left no room for speculation. If you brought Maren a problem, she either fixed it or told you it wasn't a problem. Harmonic interference, she said, barely glancing at my spreadsheet. The rebar in the dam is picking up VLF from the Navy's submarine communication array. That signal follows lunar cycles. I ran a correlation against NOAA tidal predictions for the Atlantic coast. 97% match. She looked at me for a long moment. Replace the data logger. If it persists with new hardware, I'll go out there with you. I replaced the data logger. The readings persisted. Maren kept her word. We drove out on a Thursday morning in April. Overcast, low 40s. The basin looked the same, dry, cracked, empty. The intake tower stood in the center like a monument to something abandoned. Maren checked the dam first sluice gate housings, spillway crest, tow drain outlets, everything rusted but intact. Then we walked down into the basin. The lakebed was unsettling in a way I hadn't expected. When a reservoir is full, the water hides everything beneath it. When the water leaves, all of that comes back. We passed the remains of a gravel road, the old county route that ran through the valley before it was flooded in 1958. The asphalt was gone, dissolved by decades of submersion, but the road grade was still visible, a shallow ridge in the sediment. On either side, fence posts jutted from the mud at regular intervals, their wood bleached and swollen. "Those are from the Harlan farms," Maren said. 4 or 5 families lived here before the dam. County bought them out. About 50 yards further, we passed a set of concrete steps standing alone in the sediment. 3 steps leading up to a threshold that opened onto empty air. The house they'd belonged to was gone 50 years underwater, had seen to that. But the steps remained, and beside them, a rusted iron post where a mailbox had once hung. The mounting bracket was still bolted on. I could make out letters stamped into the metal, but I didn't stop to read them. Everything out here was named Harlan. We reached the intake tower. Up close, it was massive, a concrete column about 12 feet square, rising 40 feet above the basin floor. The mineral staining on the walls was vivid, brown, orange, and white horizontal lines, each recording a water level that had held long enough to leave a chemical signature. At the base of the tower on the south side was a steel hatch. It opened into the intake shaft, a vertical access tunnel descending through the reservoir floor into the pipe system below. When the reservoir was full, this shaft was submerged. Now it was exposed. The hatch was closed, but not locked. The padlock hasp was empty. "When was the last time anyone was down there?" I asked. Maren checked her phone. 2016, during the drawdown. 8 years ago. I pulled the hatch open. A breath of air came up cold, damp, heavy. It smelled like wet concrete and iron. Below, a steel ladder descended into darkness. The rungs were wet. Not rusted moisture, not condensation. Freshly wet. Slick with clear water. "Groundwater seepage," Maren said. But she said it the way people say things when they're choosing the most comfortable explanation. I went down first. The shaft dropped about 35 feet. At the bottom, it opened into the main intake conduit, a concrete pipe roughly 8 feet in diameter that once carried water from the reservoir to the treatment plant 2 miles downstream. The tunnel should have been empty. Water covered the floor to a depth of about 3 feet. Clear, still, and cold. My boots hit it, and the temperature went straight through my soles. I swept my flashlight across the surface. The water was clean, not stagnant, not silted. It looked like tap water. Maren came down behind me. She stood on the last dry rung and stared. "That's not supposed to be here," she said quietly. We waded upstream toward the reservoir basin. Our flashlight beams cut through the dark, reflecting off the water and the curved concrete walls. The silence was absolute. After about 100 yards, the water was mid-thigh, and it was warmer about 4 degrees Celsius. The temperature of deep lake water, not groundwater, not surface runoff. We reached the junction chamber, a larger space where the main intake tunnel intersected with 2 service tunnels. One led to the dam's sluice gate chamber, one to an old auxiliary outlet capped decades ago. The chamber was maybe 20 feet across. The water was chest deep. Maren stopped. She was breathing faster. "Kyle, shine your light on the walls." I swept the beam up. The old water line, the mineral stain from when the reservoir was full, ran horizontally about 7 feet above our heads. Below it, there were new lines, fresh mineral deposits, a series of horizontal bands descending from the old water line toward the current surface. Each band slightly lower than the one before, spaced about 2 inches apart. The water had been rising, incrementally, over months, leaving its mark with each high tide cycle. The most recent band was less than a foot above the current surface. "It's filling," Maren said. "The whole tunnel system is filling." "From where?" "I don't know." I shined my light down the tunnel that led toward the sluice gate chamber. "We should check the gates," I said. "If they're open, this water should be draining downstream." Maren looked at the dark tunnel. Then she started wading. The sluice gate tunnel was about 60 yards long. The water stayed at chest depth. Our flashlights created a small bobbing circle of visibility in the absolute darkness. We reached the gate chamber. 3 sluice gates side by side set into the base of the dam. Each gate was a steel plate, roughly 6 feet wide and 8 feet tall, operated by a hand wheel mechanism on a catwalk above. The catwalks were partially submerged. All 3 gates should have been open. They were left open in 2016. Gates 1 and 3 were open. Gate 2 was closed. The steel plate was fully seated in its frame. The hand wheel was turned to the closed position. And on the wheel, the shaft, and the catwalk railing, there was grease. Fresh, amber-colored grease, the kind you apply with a gun to prevent corrosion. Someone had closed this gate recently and maintained it. On the catwalk, just above the water line, next to the hand wheel, sat a plastic storage bin, hardware store type. Lid snapped shut. I pulled it down and opened it. A grease gun, half used, a crescent wrench, a headlamp with fresh batteries, and a spiral-bound notebook, its pages wrinkled from humidity but legible. Dates, dozens of them. 1 per page, each entry in the same format. Date, water level, notation. November 14th, 2022, 0.6 meters steady. December 3rd, 2022, 0.7 meters steady. January 15th, 2023, 0.9 meters rising. The entries continued through 2023 and into 2024. The water levels climbed with each entry. August 22nd, 2024, 2.1 meters rising. September 10th, 2024, 2.3 meters holding. The last dated entry was 3 weeks before our visit. March 2nd, 2024, 2.3 meters, gate 2 adjusted holding. Below it, separated by a blank line, in the same steady handwriting, a single undated notation. 10.4 meters crest. Someone had been coming here for over a year, climbing down the intake shaft, wading through rising water in the dark, maintaining the sluice gate, recording the levels. And they had written down the number at which the water would reach the top of the dam. Not as a warning, as a destination. "Who wrote this?" I said, my voice echoing off the chamber walls. Maren took the notebook. She flipped to the inside front cover. A single name in blue ink, E. Harlan. "Harlan," she said, "like the reservoir. Like the valley." Maren placed the notebook back in the bin. She placed the bin back on the catwalk. Then she turned and started wading back toward the junction chamber. "Maren." "We're leaving. We need to report this. I know what we need to do, and I'm going to do it from dry land." We climbed out in silence. The daylight felt wrong, too bright, too open. The empty basin stretched around us, pale and cracked. On the drive back, Maren said one thing. "The water in that tunnel is 4 degrees exactly. That's the temperature of a deep stratified lake, not groundwater." She paused. "That water thinks it's still in a reservoir." 2 days later, Maren filed a transfer request. When I asked her about it, she shook her head. "I've worked in this county for 26 years. I've never seen a system someone was maintaining in secret. That's not an anomaly, Kyle. That's a project. Someone is filling that reservoir, and they've been doing it long enough to keep a logbook. Then we find out who. No, you find out who." Within the month, Maren took early retirement. 26 years, no farewell. She cleaned out her desk on a Friday afternoon and left her keys on my workbench with a sticky note that said, "Check the dam cameras." The Harlan Dam site had a single security camera mounted on the access gate. 7 years of continuous footage. Daytime recordings were normal. Empty road, empty dam, occasional deer. Every recording between midnight and 4 a.m., on every night the logbook showed an entry, was corrupted. Gray static, unrecoverable, 7 years. Every midnight window destroyed. I sent the drive to a data recovery service in Pittsburgh. They pulled one partial frame from a corrupted block dated November 2023. The access road at night, lit by the camera's infrared emitter. The gate was open. On the road, walking away from the camera toward the dam, was a figure. The image was heavily distorted, horizontal lines cutting across it, contrast blown. But I could make out a person, walking steadily, carrying the storage bin in one hand. The figure was wearing rubber waders. I drove to the county records office. I asked the clerk to pull property files for the original Harlan Valley landowners. The families bought out in 1957 before the dam was built. 5 families, 4 straightforward. Fair market value, signed agreements, relocated to Coulter or Braden Falls. The 5th was Elias Harlan, the valley's namesake. Elias refused to sell. The county used eminent domain. He was forcibly removed in June 1957 and relocated to a boarding house in Coulter. On September 8, 1957, 3 weeks before the dam gates were closed, Elias checked out of the boarding house. He told the landlord he was going home. The valley was already filling. The creek had been dammed, and water was rising across the fields, the roads, the foundations. They never found Elias. The sheriff's report noted his truck was parked at the end of the access road near the dam. His boots were in the cab. He had walked down into the valley barefoot, into the rising water. I closed the file. I drove to Harlan one more time. Late afternoon. The light going amber. Shadows long in the basin. The hatch on the intake tower was open. I had closed it. Maren and I had closed it together, pulling it shut and making sure it latched. It was standing open, and the ladder rungs were wet. I didn't go down. I walked to the dam instead, to the sluice gate control housings on the surface. After our discovery, I'd reported the closed gate. The county sent a crew to open it and padlocked all 3 hand wheels in the open position. I checked Gate 2's control housing. The padlock was intact. The chain was intact. The handwheel hadn't been turned. But through the inspection window, the gate position indicator pointed to closed. Gate 2 was shut again, from the other side. I called the county engineer. I told him the gate had closed itself. I told him the tunnel system was flooding. I told him the dam with structural cracking was holding back water again. He said he'd send an inspection team in the morning. That night, the Scotter reading hit 2.6 meters, the highest I'd ever seen it. The county team confirmed the water, confirmed the closed gate. They sent a diver to open it. The tunnel was too flooded for waiting and welded the gate in place. 3 days later, the reading jumped to 2.8 meters. I drove out and checked. All 3 gates were open. The weld was intact, but the water was still rising. I stood on the dam and looked down into the basin, cracked gray lakebed in every direction. But near the intake tower, in a rough circle about 50 feet across, the ground was dark, wet. Water was seeping up through the cracks in the reservoir floor, thin, clear ribbons spreading across the dry sediment. The reservoir was filling, not from rain, not from the creek, not from any source I could identify, from below. I looked at the intake tower. The hatch was closed again. From below it, I could hear water, not dripping, flowing. And beneath the sound of water, something else, a metallic clank, faint, rhythmic, steady. The sound of a hand wheel being turned, slowly, deliberately, patient hands working in the dark. I left. I filed a formal report with the county and the state dam safety office. I recommended an emergency structural assessment. I noted that the dam had never been repaired, that water was accumulating, and that the sluice gates were not maintaining their positions. The state sent an engineer. He inspected the dam, confirmed the cracking from 2014, and recommended continued monitoring. That was 5 months ago. The reading today is 4.1 meters. I drive past the Harlan access road every morning. For the first few months, the basin still looked dry from the ridge. Last week, I looked down and saw it. A dark, flat shape at the bottom of the basin, maybe an acre, a thin sheet of water reflecting the October sky like a black mirror. The reservoir is coming back. It's happening so slowly that no one in the county has noticed. No one except me and a retired technician who won't return my calls. And the dam with 10-year-old structural cracks that was never repaired. The dam that the state has recommended continued monitoring for is holding back water again. I haven't sold my house. I keep telling myself the state will act, that the engineers will see the numbers, that someone will intervene before the reading reaches the number I can't stop thinking about. The number written at the bottom of a logbook, in a flooded tunnel, in a dead man's handwriting. 10.4 meters crest, but every night I open the dashboard and watch the number climb. And every night I think about Elias Harlan walking barefoot down the old county road into the rising water in 1957, walking home. The logbook had empty pages left, dozens of them. And last night, when I checked the reading before bed, I noticed something new in the data. The tidal pattern, the 12-hour, 25-minute cycle that has been running for 2 years, skipped. For the first time since the reading started, the water didn't fall back at low tide. It just kept rising,